My name is Hugo. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about feature flags. Um, First, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm from Recife, in Brazil. I'm a computer scientist, graduated in the Federal University in there, in my state. I'm in a serious relationship with web APIs and SPAs. Currently, I'm a web developer. Um, and I'm a guitar player in a garage band that only plays on the members' places, so we suck, but I love to do it. And I work on Vinta, which is a software studio there in Recife. Uh, we are consultants, software studio, so we help our customers build and evolve products. With top-notch development and design, UX techniques. So we are sponsoring by Gotten. We have a stand in there, and we have some giveaways. We have some swag, and we're distributing coffee, Brazilian coffee, which is really good. You should try it out, and we'd love to talk to you if you want to. Um, so about feature flags. Feature flags is a very simple concept. It's a technique that allows you to activate and deactivate features without touching the code base. So you store the flags elsewhere, not in the code, just for making it easy to change without touching the code. So it's a very simple concept. And I'll show you how to implement in a very complex scenario. We have a hello world function. And we want to add this very complex feature, which is say hello to a specific person. We are passing a name as a parameter. And the first step is just this function. We have this print hello function, which prints hello world. And the second step is creating an VAR that will store if our new feature is on or off. I'll name it toggle say hello to user and set the value to 1 just to make sure it's activated at first. This step's kind of optional. I'm creating a helper here, helper function that checks if the value of the flag is on or off. So it receives a lowercase, snake case feature name, and just converts it to the environment variable name, and checks if the value is 1. If it's 1, it's on. If it's anything else, it's off. It's false. So it returns a boolean. And the fourth step is just adding the new feature with feature flag. So if we're going just to evolve the software, it will be just adding this print hello, the third line in there, the third line. We could just change the function to that, but with feature flags, we are adding this check to verify if the flag is on or off. And this kind of adds a lot of complexity, right? We kind of double the amount of lines. Not double, it's more than double, right? So is that really worthy? We are kind of increasing the complexity, and what are we receiving back? What's the advantage of doing this? This is a very simple task, very simple feature, so it's not a very good example of how can we use feature flags in the real world. But the best thing about feature flags, I guess, is about bugs. Because if you, they're coming to your application, to your product will suffer with bugs. We don't know where they come from, but we know they're coming. With feature flags, you kind of have time for solving bugs. You get a time to solve bugs in the right way. So you can avoid, we can quickly deactivate the feature that is buggy and avoid new affected users, stop data corruption, and have proper time to build a proper fix. So we don't have to rush things. That's, my friends, is what I call peace of mind. Okay, so we are getting peace of mind for developers. And this makes, sorry. So this is what I call peace of mind. And another thing that helps a lot in our development flow is avoiding conflict, because with feature flags you can sync the code more often. If something breaks, you can push the feature to deploy. You can deploy it, put it live without problem, because you can have an off state and the feature will be there. No one is going to see. So you can sync your code more often. So everyone in your team is on the same page. So it's with the same code and knows where the code is going. So you avoid conflict. You can have a better development flow. And the last and last but not least, sorry. Last but not least is validation. So you can use feature flags to validate if the features are, if the new feature you are adding is better than the old one. This is a very complex science, validation. It has a lot of input. We're not going deep on this validation, but it's a very good advantage. If you use it right, you can have a lot of good inputs in your project, your product. So about flags in the real world. How can we use flags in the real world? The example I gave in the beginning of this talk is very simple, but in the real world we have a lot of complex features that kind of have its, every product has its own, can I say, it has its own environment, has its own needs. So we are going to discuss three things: how to store the flags, how to avoid disasters, and how to avoid chaotic code base. So about how to store the flags, we have a lot of options. For instance, you can start by just adding a settings file in your project with the values of the flags. It's very easy to implement. It's ideal for offline applications. And when the objective is just to improve development flow by making easier to sync code without affecting other team members. So the concern is that it requires redeploy. So anytime that you have to update the values of the flags, you have to deploy the application again to change the new file, the settings file. So it may not be a good option if you have a web product, for instance. The other option is to use VARs. It's also very easy to implement. You can store complex data as well, serialized, of course. And the concerns are that you need to restart your application anytime that you change the value of the VARs. So you have to be concerned, for instance, if you have a lot of software, server instances for your product, you have to worry about updating all of them. So if you don't have an automatic process to that, you have to be very careful about this, because some instances can be outdated with the outdated value for the flag, and it will be, you turn your product inconsistent. So another way to store is using database, and by database I mean any database like SQL or NoSQL or memory-based, memory database like Redis. And the best advantage on using database is that it's immediate, so it doesn't need restart. You just change the value, and the next time that someone requests something for your application, it will have the new flag value. And you can structure the data using columns and using proper data structuring. And one concern about this is kind of concurrency, because if you change the value of your flag while there's code running, there's a background task, or there are pending requests on your web application, it can, if you have 2 lines of code that picks the value of the flag in the database, it can pick different values. So Imagine if your request starts with one value and then in the middle of the request it gets another value, it can lead to inconsistent states on your application. So other problem is latency, because you have to access an external database. It may not even be on the same machine, in the same server. So it can have latency problems. And another option is using third-party APIs. They have a lot of features that you can use, like interactive dashboards to see how your flags are performing, or what's their state. They can provide you an administrative interface for you to change the values of the flags. But the concerns is that you need to pay for them. So it's not. I didn't see anything for free. You have to pay for them. They also have the same problem in concurrency. So of course, this concurrency problem has ways to handle. So we can just use caching and memoizing to get the first. Anytime that we get the first value, we skip this value until the end of the request or the background job that you're running. And they also have latency problems, the same of database, because they are external. They are not in the same machine that you're running your application. So it has latency too. And about avoiding disaster, these are the options, pretty much, the options we have for storing the flags. But now let's talk about how to avoid disaster, because feature flags are great, but they're no silver bullet. You need to be very cautious, because if you do it wrong, your application may be totally corrupted. You can have a huge headache. So the first step to avoid disasters is to be very careful with data. If you're running operations like drop, delete, alter table, if you're running operations that will change your table and lose a column, lose a table as well, you can have problems, because this can be harder to roll back. So prefer redundancy. If you can, duplicate tables, duplicate columns, store the same value in two tables with the flag on and the flag off, so you don't lose things, because everything else you can fix, so, right? Everything else you can fix, but data is really hard to fix. If you lose data, it's kind of, there's no comeback, no rollback. You need to use backups, but you may lose things between the last backup and the current state. So one thing to remember is that users that started using when the flag was on, they will probably need to use your system. They're trying to use your system, your product, while the flag's turned off because of some bug or something. So if the feature that they need, it's not available, you need to show them at least a message saying that the feature is not available right now. So the best scenario is to treat them, have a fallback for when the flag is off. But if you don't, at least show a message. One other thing is about pending requests. As I told you about the concurrency problem, pending requests and background tasks may be a problem if you don't use caching and memoizing, because you can have multiple places in your code that picks the value of the flag, and this may lead to inconsistent states of your data. So caching and memoizing, if you can pick the first time and store that value for the rest of the code run, it would be a good solution for this. One other thing is automated tests. You need to create automated tests for both states, on and off the flag, because the things may break only on the off state, for instance, and the state is on in production. You're not going to see the bug unless you need to turn it off. So you have to test all the states of the flags, even combination of them if possible. And this leads to us to a big problem, which is flags nesting. If you start adding flags to your product and don't destroy them later, don't remove them from the code later, you have flags nesting, and this leads to a very hard environment for testing because the combinations are really hard to test. You need to kind of test, I don't know the calculus for that, but there's a there's a lot of tests. Imagine that you have 4 nested features. You have to test the state on and off for each one nesting. So it leads to a chaotic testing. So, and that leads to our next problem, which is avoiding chaotic code. How can you do that? And there's only one answer for that, which is flags can last long. You can leave them in your code forever, or your code will be like this. You know, it will be a lot of nesting and really hard to read. It make it really hard to read, to understand. So it's not a good practice to leave flags there. So there's a flow for that. You need to develop, launch the new feature, and validate and remove the flag. You have to remove it later. Validate how well the new feature goes. You need to do that. You need to know if the user experience improved with the new feature, and measure. If you can measure, you can get feedback, but if you can measure it automatically, we'll have to have the decision about this. And if you're taking too long to validate features, you need to have a schedule for removing flags. Otherwise, your code quality will degrade a lot with leftover flags. And even old flags can stop working and you don't see it in the moment. And to fix that, it will be very complex. So scheduling the flag removal and sticking with the schedule, it's very important. Other tip is to create patterns for naming things to make it easier to find the code in the flag, so in the new feature. And it make it easier to remove it later. It's a good tip to create patterns for naming with flags. And feature modularization helps a lot as well. There's less places to remove if you need to remove a feature, a state of the flag. It's less risky to have bugs and removing code by mistake. And using design patterns, it's really good if you want to modularize your application. So these are some that relates to it. So strategy, chain of responsibility, pipelines. They're very good for using feature flags. If you want to have a look at them later, I really recommend for adding feature flags with them. And other thing is to avoid if-else nesting. So that slide I showed previously, there's a lot of if-else nesting. It makes really hard to read your code. So if you can, you avoid it. Use functions to encapsulate code. Use guard ifs. So instead of using if-else, you can just return in some if. So your code stops right in there, the function, and the rest of the function is one only flow. It's not nested. So it may help with legibility. So readability. One other tip is to write different tasks for feature flags for on and off state. By doing this, you make it easier to remove the tasks too. So name the task with flag on and flag off or something like this. So it's easier to find which tasks you need to remove when you're removing the one state of the feature. And the last one is don't reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of tools that you can use right now for adding feature flags to your application. So you don't need to develop code for handling a specific state of feature flags. These are some of the tools I could test before this application, this presentation. So the first one is Gutter. It's kind of complex. It's very powerful, but it's kind of hard to use. You need to understand how it works. It's very flexible. It doesn't relate to a framework, so you can use it with vanilla Python. It has plugins for Django admin. So if you want to install a plugin on Django and you have an interface for managing your flags. There's also Flickr client, which is a new one, and it's more simple than Gutter, but it's also very powerful, and it has flexible storage. Both of them have flexible storage, so you can store your flags anywhere you want. But the bad part is that you need to use script for changing the flag state. You need to run something on your server to change the state of the flag. Another option is FeatureHemp. It's very simple, very simple. It's not flexible on storage. You have to use Redis for storing the flags, but it's really easy to start using it, so you don't have to read a lot of documentation to understand how it works. And there's specific ones for frameworks. There's Flask feature flags, which is flexible on storage, but and you need to change the flags value through code. So it's very simple too. And there's Django Waffle. This one I used a lot. We kind of use in some projects on Vinta. It uses DynamoDB storage, so it also has a Django admin interface, so you can just use Django as is, Django admin to change the state of the flags. It also gives you interface for doing this through script and gives you a lot of features like launching a feature only for part of your users, using context, using cookies. So it's a very good option too. And the conclusions about the feature flags is that this talk is kind of really related with our experience with feature flags. So this is really empiric. And yes, it's more work. Featuring flags adds a lot of complexity to developing features, but the extra work is totally worth it. We kind of have a lot of improvement in our productivity and in our response to bugs, so it's really cool to use feature flags. The extra work is totally worth it. And these people think that too. So Martin Fowler has a very good article about feature flags if you want to see it later. There's Kent which talks about feature flags in a more product level, not technical. It says all the advantages that Facebook had by using feature flags. And there's also this article I wrote with the content of this talk. Everything I talked about here is in there too, so if you want to consult it later. All these companies use feature flags a lot, including Vinta, which is the one I work for. So, and that's it, folks. Thank you. If you got any questions.